Hello, sellers. Come on in. I'm Kathy, and I love to be selling. Come on in, come on in, come on in. Today, we're talking vintage clothing. This is a fun topic, and vintage clothing is just such a great thing to source. All age groups buy vintage clothing. Vintage clothing is something you can source pretty much anywhere, not only in the United States, around the world. It's something with strong appeal to buyers. It has a huge range of prices, and it's just a great item. With the way the economy sort of goes up and down. Hi, Sharon. How are you? Good to see you. What I've been focusing on is thinking of things that are going to stay strong, sort of regardless of what's going on. And vintage clothing is great. People love it. Some people, their entire wardrobe is vintage. Other people, they have one or two items that they love are vintage. Vintage is something you can mix with modern clothing. So it's just guys wear vintage, women wear vintage, older folks wear vintage, younger folks wear vintage. Here in New York City, I'll see high school kids. I see college. I see older folks. All ages wearing vintage. It's just such a fun style. And there's a lot of different styles to vintage, so you can totally make it your own. And again, a fun thing to source. But what can be challenging, hey, Melissa, good to see you. Hi, Dale. In sourcing vintage is there's modern. I see this a lot in New York City. There's modern. So there's a certain thing that's vintage, and then a manufacturer has recreated it. And I'll see sellers get in trouble because they'll buy it thinking, oh, it's this or oh, it's that. And it's not. It's modern. It's a modern version of the vintage shirt, the vintage dress, the vintage shoes, whatever. So I wanted to go over some wonderful vintage shopping tips that my friend Cheryl shared. And I have her permission to share with you. She is a very experienced vintage seller on eBay. And she buys at estate sales a lot. So she's going into the situation that some of you might have with going to church sales and rummage sales and thrift shops, where you go in and there's a lot of inventory that you've got to look at quickly and make choices quickly, or you're not going to get the item. So Cheryl shared these super tips, and I have her permission, and I'm going to share them with you because these are great for whether you're doing it in a thrift store, a yard sale, an estate sale. These are fast vintage shopping tips so that you don't end up buying something modern thinking that you have made the score of the century, and then you get stuck. And what Cheryl really told me, because we were chatting about this after I saw the tips, is really focus on the label, because that's something you can find quickly on the clothing, and it will tell you a lot about the vintage clothing item, whether it's a shirt, whether it's a dress, whether it's a skirt, ties. Look for the label. And the first thing she said in looking for labels is look for the care label. Now, I know oftentimes in things that I have found, the care label, it'll be on the seam. So like if it's a shirt or a dress, it may not always be in the collar. It may be in the inseam. Sometimes if an item still has an extra button, which sometimes they will, it will be in there, but it may not be in the collar. So just because you don't see care instructions on the collar, look on the inseams of the item. And she said, does the item have a care label? Washing instructions. Okay, so this is not content, it's the washing instructions. If it does, it's most likely made after 1971. So if you find washing instructions, a care label, it's most likely after 1971. Now, after 71 can still be vintage, but it means it's most likely not the 60s, the 50s. Okay. Next thing, look for the fabric label. The label, is it cotton? Is it linen? They were introduced in the United States in the 60s. So you're looking for the fabric label. So the first one is the care label. Then you're looking for fabric labels. Now, this is a fun one, and this is one that I've had the joy of finding on some items. Look for union tags. And if you haven't seen them before, search on the internet so that you can recognize them. If the tag says union made or ILGWU, and that's, if I remember correctly, that's International Ladies Garment Worker Union. And they're fun when you, and it's a very distinctive label. So again, search on the internet because you can really recognize it like in a second. Yeah, look for the union label. You remember that ad? I remember it too, Dale. It was made before the 1980s. So that means it's before 1980, because in the 80s, the union labels were phased out. I have not only found union labels on clothing, I've also found them on hats. I did a big consignment of vintage hats a ways back, and quite a few of them had union labels in the hats. Okay, so that's a bonus tip for you. Zip codes. Now, this is a fun one. If the label or the tag, so again, we're looking for any kind of thing that might be in the inseam, the back of it, just anything that's on the garment. If it has a zip code, the garment was made after 1963 when zip codes were put into use. So I'm looking for care, I'm looking for fabric, I'm looking for union labels, I'm looking for zip codes. Fabric names. This is a fun one. Look for odd names. Look for Dacron. I remember that. Polyester. Dacron polyester was used from 1958 to 1970. So look for Dacron polyester. Kiana, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's Qiana. Kiana was made from 1968 through the 1970s. So you're looking for the more unusual names for the fabrics. Defunct countries. This is another good one. If the label lists a made in country that no longer exists, Yugoslavia, Burma, a quick Google can help narrow down the date. So if you see a made in with a country that is not a modern country, that will help. I know sometimes in discovering Asian themed items, if they're made in Japan or Taiwan rather than China, can help indicate dates on items too. So all of this, the internet is your friend in search, but particularly for defunct countries. Half sizes, this was a trip down memory lane, from the early 1940s to about 1970, half sizes were used for some women's clothing. So if you're seeing that 14 and a half, 12 and a half, it means it's most likely from the 40s to the 70s, half sizes for women's clothing. Lot, if it says lot, L-O-T on the label, it dates the garment prior to 1979 when lot designations ceased to be used. So if there's the name lot, L-O-T on the label, it's a lot designation on the garment, most likely prior to 1979. So again, when you're having to go through clothes quickly because you're at an estate sale, rummage sales, the kind of thing where the clothes are going in the bag and people are just grabbing things, and you've got to make really quick decisions, go through and look for the labels because it can really, really help make choices. The other thing is, if you do have a decent amount of vintage items that you're selling, either with or without an eBay store, another thing that you can do, I've got a couple vintage seller friends of mine that do this, and I've seen some big online vintage sellers do this. So let's say I have a lot of great, I was thinking about this, let's say I have a lot of great vintage bathing suits, right? You know, that wonderful style is, you can add some modern vintage inspired items to sort of flesh out, populate your store. Because I was thinking those wonderful vintage bathing caps, right? Remember the ones with the flowers and everything? is you could absolutely source that kind of thing from modern suppliers. Obviously, you make it very clear that it's vintage inspired, okay? It's not the actual item. To go with the items that you have that are vintage. Things like vintage inspired jewelry is a great one for bracelets, for earrings, for necklaces, okay, for hat pins, all that kind of thing. Again, if I'm carrying a lot of wonderful vintage hats, I might do some vintage inspired scarves or hat pins. If I have a lot of vintage purses, I might look for vintage inspired wallets or coin purses. So just realize, especially when you find a certain category, you've got shoppers that are coming to you. You hit the mother load of vintage purses, so you've got quite a few listed, or you have good sources where you are for vintage purses, for vintage shirts, blouses, men's shirts, whatever it is. Then also think about, are there modern things that I can add to this? Because you can get it, you can get them from wholesale suppliers, which you can go online and look for. You might even find them in thrift stores, in retail stores, okay? Because you know what the look is, and you go, that's vintage inspired. I can get it at a good price. I can put it in my store because I'm attracting vintage shoppers to my items. So that's food for thought for you. If you do find you have a lot of wonderful vintage items in your store, or in your listings, what other things can I add that my shoppers would like? So that I can be selling, the sweater with the bracelet. I can sell the hat with the hat pin, the purse with the little coin purse for a few coin purses. It's a way to sort of expand your shopping cart and to get more sales. But wonderful tips on the fabric labels. And as it is early June, that means Father's Day shoppers are abounding on the internet right now. So it's a great time to be showcasing and showing off items that are just the perfect Father's Day gift. And what happens sometimes as sellers is that we're used to the things that in our family were given as Father's Day gifts. Like for my dad, he loved power tools. Sort of anything to do with tools. My dad loved tools. But another family, I remember my good friend from college, her family, her father, he loved to cook. So anything cooking, he loved for Father's Day. So he loved cookbooks and utensils and appliances for the kitchen. So every family is different. Every dad is different. And you may not be thinking that as a Father's Day item because in your family, with your friends, that was not a Father's Day gift. But in another family, it is a Father's Day gift. So what I've done is I've put together a great guide for you. It's completely free. And you're going to hop over to my website, ilovetobeselling.com. And when you get there, you're going to see the banner, 44 Killer Product Ideas for Father's Day. And it's over 8 pages, just pages and pages of ideas for Father's Day. One, look at what you already have listed. And you go, oh my goodness, that's a Father's Day item. It can help you as far as if you're sharing on social media. And the other thing is if you have some unlisted inventory and it's in the guide, you go, this is perfect for Father's Day. I must get it listed. So hop over to my website, ilovetobeselling.com, grab my free guide, 44 Killer Product Ideas for Father's Day. So that way, attract those nice Father's Day shoppers into your items. And use the tips, the wonderful tips from my friend Cheryl for the labels, because it's just such a great way to quickly go through things when you're shopping. Again, whether you're at an estate sale or a thrift store, I can quickly look at the labels and get an idea of whether the item's vintage or not. So then I know, if it's worth looking up and doing the research and finding out if it's something that I want to purchase to offer for sale. But vintage rocks. Vintage sells to all age groups. Vintage sells year round. It's a great thing to put in your store. But again, you want to know that it is vintage and not vintage inspired. So enjoy that and grab the free tips for Father's Day. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad it helps you, Sharon. Great. Good to see you too, Melissa. Great to see everybody. And Dale, thank you for joining me. Bye-bye, everybody. I'm Kathy, and I love to be selling.